Good day, everyone. I'm Olay Shorunke, and you're listening to Edu Steps, the podcast that helps young people and their families navigate this journey we call life. Festus is here with me today. Festus, as we kick off another year, have you noticed any major changes in our education system?
Well, shoot, we're not even going to have an education system left the way this is looking, Or let me say, it's a lot been shaken up in the last 40 days. I think it's only been 40 days. So, yeah, we're going to see.
Well, that's a great segue. It's probably the best segue, because today we're going to be tackling the critical issue of recent changes at the Department of Education. From updates on things like school lunches to Pell Grants, we're going to break down what these changes mean for students, parents, and educators. So, of course, if you don't know, President Trump has issued an executive order aimed at dismantling the Department of Education, with the stated goal of returning control of education to the states and to local levels. This initiative has to do with redistributing the department's responsibilities to other federal agencies. It's important to note that completely eliminating the Department of Education would require an act of Congress. So let's talk about some of the changes. There are plans to shift the oversight of federal student loans to the Small Business Administration. I've also heard possibly those things going to the Treasury Department. I'm not sure how those details are yet, but that's kind of it. Those details are yet to be seen. School nutrition programs are intended to be managed by the Department of Health and Human Services. There are also plans to move the oversight of services for students with disabilities to the Department of Health and Human Services. The administration has stated that key programs like Title I and the IDEA Act will be preserved. However, there are concerns among education advocates about how these programs will be affected by the redistribution of responsibilities. Some of the biggest concerns we've seen so far are educators and advocates expressing concerns that these changes could negatively impact vulnerable students, particularly those in low-income schools and those with disabilities. There are also concerns about the potential loss of federal oversight and the impact on equal access to education. There are also legal questions surrounding the president's ability to move aspects of the department without congressional approval. So basically kind of sort of a lot of confusion, right? Also, there are some staff changes. The department announced plans to lay off over 1,300 employees, which is almost half of its staff. And I think a lot of the sentiment has been towards pushing the focus to state control, right? So the states are going to be more in control of education as they see fit. Administration aims to promote innovation and best practices in education at the state level rather than through federal oversight. Despite the changes, the department will continue to administer student loans, Pell Grants, and resources for children with special needs. So, Festus, I just want to get your overall thoughts and view on just a lot of those changes that have happened. It's quite a bit that's happened.
Yeah, we talked about this a little while ago, just kind of introductory. This was even, I think, as President Trump was coming into office and kind of just looking at it and saying, hey, look, we don't know until we know. And I think right now we're starting to see how it's shaping up. I think it's starting to shape up in a way that some people expected and some people didn't expect. Definitely not what I expected. And I think that the hard part is some people don't even have as much of a macro picture or macro vision, just simply because this is something that affects all of us so deeply and personally in terms of how we feel. You know what I'm saying? And so, obviously we're advocates for education here at Ladder Success, but when it comes down to, just the direction that we were going, this feels like whiplash. You know what I'm saying? This feels like whiplash. And so what I mean by that is that it seemed we were heading in a direction that was more inclusive and more open and accepting, but at the same time that had its challenges. Parents had serious challenges that they were facing. regarding their students, meaning, students who were being abused and groomed by teachers, by educators, and because of how the laws were in place, the parents could not do anything about it because certain things were no longer required to be reported. So that put some challenges in place, because some things that were healthcare related things were bring brought into the scope of education related things, and so because of all that mix up, it was really, really challenging. And so unfortunately, a lot of things have been conflated, and this conflation is brought a lot of ambiguity, and with that ambiguity, it's stirring up a lot of fear, right? Because again, the Department of Education is one of the youngest departments in the federal government. And it's only been around about 45 years, a little over 45 years. And so, anybody who's a millennial grew up with a Department of Education, and now it's like, whoa, what is America like without that? You know what I mean? And so I think the real challenge here is that sometimes the way we view progress, the way we view innovation can be slightly askewed. And what do I mean by that is that, there just because you did something doesn't mean you made actual progress, right? you know what I'm saying? And sometimes those things get conflated.
Hey, LYS fam, it's Olay. Thanks so much for listening to LYS. I just wanted to take a quick moment to talk to the parents. That's right, mom and dad. Parents, prepare your child for their best educational fit after high school with our comprehensive LYS Parents Guidebook. Our helpful guide includes a range of activities designed to help you better understand your child's unique gifts and abilities. Additionally, we provide valuable insights into the student loan debt crisis and offer practical tips on how to avoid accumulating large amounts of debt. Our ebook also includes a wealth of information on scholarships, grants, and payment exemptions that can help guide your child towards a bright and successful future. With our expert guidance, you can rest assured that your child is well prepared to make informed decisions about their education and career path. Don't let your child's future be in jeopardy. Invest in their future today by downloading the LYS Parents Guidebook. Simply go to lys.com/parents to get your copy today. Now let's get back to the show, because it's some good topics.
So go ahead, Olay.
No, I think that is just very powerful what you just said. Really, really powerful. I don't think when they invented the nuclear bomb or the splitting of the atom, they were like, man, this is going to be amazing, right? And then it's like a couple of years later, or a couple of months later, it's like Nagasaki, Hiroshima. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, this is much, much worse than what we initially thought or planned for.
But
even though thought process. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's very interesting that you bring up nuclear weapons, because the concept of nuclear fission, which is basically the concept by which nuclear weapons are made, that entire concept was built on the, heavily on the idea of being able to destroy one's enemies for war. Mm-hmm. And the crazy part about it is the applications that can advance humanity, i.e. nuclear power plants, is not even a thing right now. You know what I'm saying? So this is kind of the toss-up that all education and all ideas are not good ideas, because the very, very interesting thing is you had 3 major world-changing incidents regarding nuclear weapons. Obviously World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I would count that as 2 things. And then the incident at Chernobyl, in which you had a power plant that was a radioactive power plant, basically shut down or explode and leak radioactive waste, which it's been 60 years and there still hasn't been a complete recovery from that, because radioactive waste usually takes about 50 years to get out of the system and whatnot. So people are still dealing with the effects of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And why do I say that? It's so much easier to tear something down than it is to build something up. And so when we look at the Department of Education, we could say, hey man, let's tear it down. but there may be unintended consequences that are going to affect a lot of lives, particularly for students, not to mention the people who lost their jobs there. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure in the long run, it's not going to feel good, but in the long run, some of those people will be able to come back into education at the state level, but right now, this is just, it's not a good look.
So with that being said, you mentioned it earlier, this can be quite a stressful time, a pressing time for obviously educators, obviously those folks who are losing their jobs. But I want to think a lot about parents, because you talked a lot about how there were certain important things that parents, if I was a parent, I could definitely, if you watch the news and you let the news affect you, I could definitely see how a lot of parents would think that they have no control over their child, right? Go ahead, Festus.
No. Let me let you finish because I'm gonna bring up a good point.
Okay, so, and I don't say control as in the sense of the parent is gonna say you're gonna do to the death whatever I say. I mean, as a parent, you are responsible for the child, and I think one of the things I think is very funny. You have to be very careful when you use common sense, when you say things like common sense, because I know what my parents meant when they said usual common sense, and I know how other people may see that same exact term. But from everything that I've learned, a parent is responsible for a child, right? Now, is there a certain level of control that parents have? Yes. If the child wants to stay up, if you can say yes or no, and the child has to listen to the parent. But I can definitely see how a lot of, in this new age of information, how a lot of, I'm talking as young as 7, 8, 9, have sentiments or certain views that may really affect how a parent, they just come into contact, they clash with the views of their parents. And a lot of that has to do with, well, as a parent, what are you exposing your child to? What is your child saying? What type of environment are you setting up for your child? And so I do understand, that level of, frustration that comes for a lot of parents. I think a lot of work, go ahead, Festus, you want to jump in?
No, I'm cutting you off. Go ahead.
Oh, so I guess my thing is, when we talk about this common sense approach, what are those fears that a lot of parents have, and how have these things been presented to the children, right? Because I think one of the things I always hear when I talk to you is, you told me, you do a pretty good job of, just making sure your kids, when it comes to access to certain things, especially on the internet, tablets and things like that, they're not able to, you control what they see, right? You don't want them to get exposed to something that they're not supposed to see. I used to call it getting exposed to things that are above your grade, above your pay grade, right? That's what I used to tell the kids. That's above your pay grade. You're not ready for that. You're not ready to tap into that knowledge.
Hey, LYS fam, it's Olay. If there's one thing I love, it's something free. I'm talking free 99, un gratis. No shipping or handling fees, no gotcha fees, nothing like that. With that being said, if you're graduating soon or thinking about college or need a nudge or help to decide, then our free ebook, 10 Things to Think About Before Going to College, has a very balanced and open-minded way of presenting your next steps. It captures broad topics in a personal way by giving students an insightful, interactive, and reflective source of inspiration. It is very beneficial to be able to visualize some of the concepts after high school and apply them directly to you. We all know life, college, and career planning decision-making choices for students can be challenging, especially as they near the completion of high school. This book will provide you with a self-paced guide to your success beyond academics and into real life. Not only is it free, you can complete this book within a week. This will definitely prepare you for long-term success. To get your free copy, simply go to lys.com/students. I mentioned it was free, right? Well, if I didn't, it's free. Like, for real. Okay, back to the podcast.
So how do parents deal with that, right? Because I think a part of that has to do with why we kind of are where we are right now.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just take one example, but I think this example, being as massive as it is, will lay some good groundwork. So, so I'm showing a document right now from the Center for Reproductive Rights, and so this document is a chapter on adolescent reproductive rights. And so when you look at, this is their definition. Okay, this is not me making anything up or anything like that. This is one of the think tanks, right? It's a nonprofit organization that espouses certain things. Okay, I'm not saying I'm for it or anything like that. I'm just going to share it and read it as such. Okay. While adolescents have the same reproductive rights as adults, they face more obstacles to enjoying those rights. Adolescents' age-related low social status and lack of autonomy can make them vulnerable to a host of rights violations. These include denial of access to reproductive health, information and services, violence and exploitation, and extreme hardship when faced with unwanted pregnancy. Governments that impose restrictions on adolescent access to reproductive information and services violate international norms. So do governments that fail to implement or enforce laws protecting adolescents from violence and discrimination. Now, this again is a double-edged sword, right? Because it sounds really, really good in terms of protecting youth, right? So I'm going to just give one example, and this, it's going to sound gruesome, so just prepare yourself. So let's say somebody was taken advantage of. I'll use the word taken advantage of, and became pregnant by that. Shouldn't they be able to report that without any recompense to them? Meaning, the school not going to the person who possibly did the harm to them and reporting them, right? So let's say, for example, and again, I'm going based off of what they put here, right? Who are adolescents and young people? And this is the definition of the term adolescence, is between the age of 10 and 19 years old. So let's say somebody's an adolescent, goes to the nurse's office and says, hey, look, I'm pregnant. Let's say, unfortunately, it was somebody who forced themselves on this person. It could do more harm than good to report it directly to the person who possibly is the person who violated that child. Fine and dandy. But again, this being a double-edged sword, when they talk about enjoying rights, right, that the age-related low social status and lack of autonomy, they're also in that saying that youth and children should be able to participate in certain activities without the knowledge of their parents. So when it comes to some of the things that we're seeing in the education system, such as, bringing people who are cross-dressers into the schools, right? This is a soft way of demonstrating certain things to children without the parents' knowledge. It's one thing if the school said, hey, we're having this event today, and you have a choice if your kid participates or not. Okay, that's totally acceptable, because then that way the parent can say, okay, I'm involved in my child's education. And I'm going to just use personal experience now, right? From a personal experience standpoint, our kids have homework, and one of our sons has trouble reading. We have been working with our son almost from the day he was born, going over alphabet, reading to all of these different types of things. And in addition to that, getting tutors, putting him in environments for learning. So for somebody to say, hey, well, I think he'd read better if he had somebody who was cross-dressed in front of him. Show me the data that says that, right? Well, kids enjoy clowns. Okay, then have a clown read. You know what I'm saying? So don't, you know what I mean? Like, so there's decisions that adults are making and forcing on children, and trying to use certain entities as workarounds for those decisions. And this is where I think that, again, this double-edged sword is kind of being pulled out, because unfortunately you have those who, again, our country's now at extremes. or extreme left or extreme right. And because of the turning that has happened, it's almost like a whiplash effect, where some parents don't even know that these things exist. They don't know why they're out there. They're just saying, oh yeah, I vote with this party, so if this party says this, it must be right, instead of being able to look at the details and look at the information that's underneath. And I think this is the thing that's really, really, really scary regarding, well, what are they teaching kids at school? And to me, there's a difference between learning and indoctrination, right? Learning, when you look at actual learning, it implies choice. Here's the material, and now you make up your own mind about the material. Not, hey, I'm right, I'm going to coddle you, I'm going to give you all of these little gifts and doodads, and then after I do all of that, now the choices that you have, are biased choices, because you've already gotten the trinkets, the gifts, and the doodads. And I think when you're dealing particularly with that kind of adolescent age group, 10 to 19 age group, we have tons of research that says your brain's not fully developed, particularly for males, until you're about 25, 26 years old. That's one of the reasons they get young people to go into the army. They think they're superheroes. when you give them a gun and you tell them to do push-ups, they think they're superheroes, so they're willing to run through a brick wall at somebody's command. They don't take 30 and 40-year-olds because they lived enough life to say, wait a second, I got some questions before I do that. And the reality is that those young people who are men and women who serve in the armed forces sometimes aren't the most educated. You could go and look this up, and it's not me being against them. I was one of them. You could go and look up the IQ level of a typical soldier, particularly an infantry soldier. And so if and this is the thing that it comes down to, if we're saying, hey, these men and women are smart enough to go into battle, are they also smart enough to be educated on why certain topics are being introduced in schools at certain grade levels without parent consent? And this is the thing. If you're missing the board meetings, if you're missing the curriculum, if you're missing the parent-teacher conferences, if you're missing, the bulletin boards, if you're not reading the emails that they send you, then, a lot of this is on you, just as a parent. And I understand things are hard, things are busy. But the thing is, if we're going to talk about rights and parent rights, and there's rights come with responsibilities. And, I'll cap it at that.
Powerful point right there. And so I have another question kind of based off of what you just said, because that's so true.
Hey, LYS fam, it's Olay once again. These days, many families are busy but want personalized attention. We at Laddering Your Success understand this dilemma and have created a unique approach to help guide you and your child with personal development tools to build a life of purpose. This intimate approach is helpful for those parents that feel the need to have a focused heart-to-heart conversation deciding on the next steps after high school. We provide individual post-secondary planning, virtual customized college and career counseling, and scholarship guidance and planning. Our one-on-one sessions are tailored to each individual student to maximize their potential in the post-secondary realm. With our guidance, your child will be able to make their dreams a reality. Don't wait. Simply go to lys.com/parents to get your copy today. Now let's get back to business on this podcast.
Last episode, or maybe 2 episodes ago, I kept stressing this. Maybe it was last week. But either way, I kept saying parents have got to be involved. Parents have got to go to board meetings. Parents have got to meet with their parents, with their teachers, with their students' teachers. You've got to show up. You got to be available. I'll never forget when I was in the 4th grade, my mom, luckily the school, we could walk through this little street and get to our school for parent-teacher night. And my mom had just finished work and she was like, let's go. And we get there. And when my teacher saw my mom and I, she beelined. I think she was talking with another parent, but she beelined for my mom. And she was like, 'cause I got to talk to his mom, because this boy, oh my gosh. And if you heard the story, that's when my mom told her, like, you can pop him. You can do what you got to do. And, you know, she was like, ain't no way, like, I can't do that. Long story short, she flicked me in the head and she got me right. But that's a different story for a different day. But I think one of the things that we do here, and Festus, I always ask this question is, how do you let parents know that they need to do more without being disrespectful? Another quick story: when I first started teaching, one of my fellow teachers, we were both first year teachers, and she said this, and I'll never forget it. And as soon as she said it, it just struck a chord with me because it made so much sense. She was like, how come no one talks about the fact that some of these parents just shouldn't be having kids? And I was like, oh, you can say that?
So technically, no. So technically, no. So this is the thing I think that is really difficult, is that when you look through human history, particularly history in the West, people have done things such as chemical and physical castration to those who they feel should not have children. And I think, you know, you end up in a place with human rights violations when you do that. You know, there's certain people who think, hey, you know, people with Down syndrome should not have children, so they should all be chemically castrated. There are certain people, unfortunately, who think that they shouldn't be alive to begin with, and so that they you know, there's a movement, and there's been people in eugenics who have not just advocated for, but actually done it. And sometimes this is the case in more advanced, and I do air quotes, countries, you know. And so these are huge challenges that most people have not sat down and thought through one iota, you know. And I think that's the thing, is when there's so much hatred and so much bias in the human heart and so much bigotry in the human heart, sometimes the real question becomes, let's say someone who did not like you or did not understand your circumstances or whatever had their way, where would we be today? Right? Let's say if all the racists who didn't like Black people had their way. Right? Let's say a lot of the people who don't like people who have any kind of illness had their way. Let's say the people who don't like people who run slow had their way. Right? So, you know, we're here on this, you know, kind of blue, green, brown ball together. And I think part of what's happening is that, you know, people have a lot of frustration with life in general, and they push that frustration onto others. And it's being seen through our through not just through our political system, through our education system, through our religious organizations and entities. It's being seen everywhere in society. And so, you know, I think, you know, I'll pause there.
Okay. So another question: do you think we become too dependent on some of these federal systems that are in place? Do you think we become too coddling as a society in regards to parenting? Are we too reliant on some of these systems that are in place?
Well, systems are designed for just that, for you to rely on it, right? So I think the real question is are we enjoying the outcomes that the systems are bringing? And I would say a lot of people say they're not. And I think that's a challenge, is how do we improve the system and see and that's again where I say it's so much easier to be destructive than constructive. With what's happening right now in the federal government is you have a lot of system realignment. And some people don't even have the slightest clue why any of this is happening. One of the reasons why some of these adjustments are happening is because of the fact that our federal government is going broke. And people say, well, how can the federal government go broke? It's pretty simple. The way that the government gets money is in two ways. One way is taxes, the other way is debt, right? So people say, well, how do you get debt? It's through government bonds, right? Surety bonds. So the government wants to build a bridge. They want to do something. It's going to take 20, 30 years. They'll say, hey, we'll give you 5% interest if you buy these bonds. The other way to get money, government gets money, is through taxes. So once the money of taxes is spent up, which is actually pretty quickly, because you could only collect taxes on right now who's working, who's living. Once that money is spent up, you're left with the bonds. And so what has happened is that we've given out so many bonds as a country. We've kicked the can down the road so long, we're at risk of the interest rate that the government is paying out on those bonds overshadowing what the government is currently taking in income. And so what that means is you got to take the macro, and this is where financial literacy comes in. You got to take the macro and try to apply it as much to the micro as possible. Okay. What happens when you don't pay your car note? What happens when you don't pay your rent? Repossession, right? Eviction. That's what our government is at risk of. And people say, well, who's going to repossess? Who's going to evict? And this is the part that's pretty sad. What happens is the people who have these bonds, right? The government is paying them. They have a choice of where they put their money. So since they have a choice of where they put their money, and it's hard for people who haven't traveled to understand this, there are other countries who are saying, hey, we'll make it nice, comfy, and convenient for you if you come here, if you live here, and if you put your money here. So places like Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and those different kinds of places are saying, bring your money and come put it here, and you'll come in and enjoy life here, right? And so as people are doing that, what that means is you're taking away those resources from your country. So what America hopes is that when people pay that, when America pays them that interest, they're going to take that money and spend that money still here in the United States. But when they go live somewhere else, they're going to spend that money somewhere else, thereby making other people rich. So again, most people don't even understand what I'm saying at all. like what? But I'm trying to make it as simple as humanly possible. Is that, are you an economic producer or are you an economic user? If you're simply relying on, hey, the government is supposed to provide jobs, then my question is, what is the government making? What is the government outcome that is of quality? And so this is where the challenge is. If government programs are running and they're effective, I'm highly skeptical that these government programs will be shut down. Obviously, some government programs can't be shut down, right? So for example, the Department of Education as a whole cannot totally be eviscerated. Why not? Because it was Congress that passed that. So the only way to get that law revoked, and if you read the executive order, is to go back to Congress and Congress to repeal that law. You see what I'm saying? So, but in terms of administration and management, that's where the president has some leeway. So I hope I'm making sense. You know, whether agree, disagree, sometimes you have to just sit down and look at the facts for what they are.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. That's very, very detailed answer. And so I think when some people hear this, they may say, man, I don't care about all that. Like, you did all that juju talk. Look, I just don't want this stuff to happen to my kids. I just don't want my kid to lose anything, right? So I guess my next question is, in regards to those folks, how does this apply, these changes, how do these changes apply to the macro in the educational system? And what should the government do to offset this problem that you just detailed?
The economic problem or the education problem?
Well, I think they kind of go hand in hand, right? Because if a person leaves high school and they don't know, I mean, outside of like us and Bino do and everything that we do, if they don't know where they stand as an economic unit, right? As a person who's going to be inputting into the, the workflow of the economy, right? What should the government do in regards to educational system, which I think we've already mentioned, because all these drastic changes, right? But what can they do to offset this current problem? Or is it even something that can be done? Is it something that they want to do?
So from a micro level, you're just talking about little old me. There's not really much you can do about things that are outside of you. So I think that's where, controlling the controllables comes into play, right? If you can still get an education, get an education. I think sometimes we look outside of ourselves and we have a lot of different excuses for why we are not successful, right? So we look at other people and we say, it's your fault that I did not do the things to make me successful, right? And I think that, don't get me wrong, there is a huge place where policy comes into play and how policy affects people's lives, because the policy is going to affect your life if you want it to or not. But the thing is, you cannot control the policies that other people create. You cannot control other people's bigotry and hatred and all of those things. You can limit it within the law, right? But that's the whole thing about laws, is that there are lawbreakers. So as long as there's lawbreakers, it doesn't matter what law you put into place, somebody's there to break it. That's what a lawbreaker is, right? And so, the unfortunate part is communities need to start empowering themselves. Individuals need to, and what I mean is circulating resources, circulating knowledge, those different types of things. I think individuals need to make themselves ready, right? So the thing is, I don't think a person can give or do something for themselves that is outside of themselves. There has to be a catalyst. There has to be some kind of change agent. And that's the thing. It could be something from change the music you listen to change who you hang around, to any form of change that's going to empower you as an individual to get in the best possible position. And a lot of it comes down to personal choice. And so, this is where I think an argument of, school vouchers and those different types of things, how does that come into play, and how does that come into effect? I think it comes into effect in a couple different ways. If the playing field is level, and if the rules of the game are published, right, and people know that, they make different choices, right? And so some of the ways that our states and our local governments can combat what's happening is they can say, hey, look, as a matter of policy, you have to give a government notice to anybody who's enrolling into that school. And that government notice can say, if you feel discriminated against by this school, right, then you could report it to your local state inspector general or your local, whatever, and you could create penalties for schools that are not open and accepting of other students. However, at the same time, unfortunately, we have seen a rash now where students are becoming incredibly violent with educators. And so they're impeding the way that other students learn. They are impeding, just the entire classroom. They're disrupting the entire learning experience. And so what happens to those students? And so this is where, again, school choice becomes a double-edged sword, because it becomes good in one way, because now you have school officials who could say, hey, look, we're looking at your record and you're not fit to come into the school environment. Now, the challenge is, can public schools do the same? And unfortunately, because of legal reasons, because schools have been sued out the wazoo, they have not been able to do the same. So I think now becomes an opportunity for people to open up, certain boys' schools, certain disciplinary schools, different types of things like that, to be able to create other options for those students who are easily distracted and also violent in schools. So, and those could be tech schools, they could be trade schools, to give some of these guys trade skills rather than just lumping everybody together. So this is going to be some interesting times, very interesting times.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And as we said before, I think we both kind of touch the subject is parents staying involved. And I do think, so this has been my hot take. And, I've been saying this for a while. Unfortunately, we are a reactive society. We're not as proactive as we like to say we are, or as we may think we are. And it's not until things like this happen that people are kind of forced to change their wavelength, or kind of change, you mentioned it earlier, changing what you're listening to, change what you're exposed to. And so I do think that because of these changes that have happened, there are going to be people who come together and hopefully come together. Hopefully you don't want to do it on your own, but hopefully you're able to come together. One of our mentors, Cleo, says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so hopefully that creates opportunities for people to come together to bring those resources to those who really need them. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Festus, for that great input that you gave us today. Remember, folks, staying informed and engaged is the key to supporting your child's educational journey, right? Thank you so much for listening to this latest episode of Edu Steps. If this episode felt like a conversation with a trusted friend, do us a favor. Hit subscribe, drop a review, and share with another parent who might need some guidance right now. Your support helps us reach more families navigating these educational changes. Remember, understanding these changes means investing in your children's futures. Keep climbing that ladder to success. Until next time, folks, this is Olay Shorunke signing off. Keep supporting, keep learning, and keep stepping up that educational ladder. Festus, my good friend, give us the phrase that pays.
So listen, there are legitimate excuses for not going to college. There's no legitimate excuse for not getting an education. And we will see you on the next episode.